So the Prophet, when he sent in the commanders with the conquest of Mecca, he said everybody should be spared except for a few people. Now, who are these few people? Books of Seerah mention different numbers. Al-Waqidi says there were exactly 6, 4 men and 2 women. But Ibn Ishaq does not give a number, but he gives names that Waqidi does not give. And Ibn Sa'd as well. So the earliest books of Seerah mention, some mention 6, some mention 7, some mention 8. And some even say 9. But even if it's 6 to 9, so between 6 and 9, right? This is the number of people that were not spared. So from a city of maybe 2,000, less than a dozen were mentioned by name. And for these people, they were the Muslims were told, for these people you may kill them wherever you find them. It doesn't matter. And who are these people? And the beauty of it is that even these people, more than half were eventually forgiven. Even this list that was an exception, still in the end many of them were forgiven. Who are these people? Number 1 on the list, Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl. I will talk about him in a while. Ikrimah, the son of the Fir'aun, because the Prophet said Abu Jahl is the Fir'aun of my ummah. Number 1 is Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl. Number 2 on this list is Abdullah ibn Khatal. Abdullah ibn Khatal. And Abdullah ibn Khatal, he had converted to Islam and came to Medina, performed the hijrah. The Prophet ﷺ sent him on an expedition, him and another Sahabi, to give a message to somebody. And on the way there, Abdullah ibn Khatal murdered the Sahabi, took his stuff and fled back to Mecca and became a murtad. So Ibn Khatal was not allowed to, and not only that, he then purchased 2 slave girls who were known for their poetry, and he asked them, or he charged them with writing poetry against the Muslims and against the Prophet ﷺ, which is, of course, in those days, this is the height of propaganda, to write these types of poetry. So he purchases 2 well-known poets, female poets that were slaves, and he puts them full-time that you're going to just write poetry against the Prophet ﷺ and against Islam. So this is Abdullah ibn Khatal, and as Ibn Khatal with a ta, and some books say Abdullah ibn al-Akhtal, so Abdullah ibn Khatal or Akhtal, and Ibn al-Akhtal or Ibn Khatal, he had a very harsh execution. He actually fled to the Haram itself, and he jumped onto the doors of the Kaaba. This is when the army is coming in. The Prophet is still outside. He hasn't come yet. This is obviously before the speech, right? So he jumped onto the doors of the Kaaba and he begged for forgiveness. And he said, protect me from the Kaaba, like from the honor of the Kaaba. Because the Kaaba is the sacred place. You're not supposed to do any bloodshed, obviously. Even in the days of Jahiliyyah. So when the Sahaba saw him and he took the curtain of the Kaaba and he put it around himself. Don't kill me. In other words, this is the height of sanctity. You understand, right? Don't kill me, like using the curtains of the Kaaba, is clinging onto it. Even the Sahaba felt this is too much, right? We can't do this now. So they actually sent an emissary back. And they said, Ya Rasulullah, Ibn al-Akhtal, he's protecting himself with the curtains of the Kaaba. What should we do? And the Prophet said, Uqtuluhu, kill him. So he was executed. So it was a very harsh punishment, and it was executed right then and there. There was another execution, Miqyas ibn Subaba. He too had pretended to become a Muslim only in order to do a revenge killing. So long story, but one of the Sahaba had killed his brother, and so he wanted to get revenge, so he pretended to be a Muslim. He then entered Medina, he then assassinated, he then returned, so he too was executed. So these two are executed. One of the most interesting stories is Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh, or Abdullah ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Sarh, that he accepted Islam, emigrated to Medina. He's a Qurashi, emigrated to Medina, and he was one of the few who began writing for the Prophet as a scribe. And eventually he became murtad, and he returned back to Mecca, and he started fabricating lies against the Prophet ﷺ, saying that the Quran was from his dictation. Now this story, by the way, is used a lot by Orientalists. The story is, they jump on this story. And he would say that I would change the Quran. And this is a lie. I mean, he's just smearing Islam with. And I would change the Quran, and the Prophet say, Azizun Hakim, or right, Samiun Alim, let's say. And so he became murtad, he returned back to Mecca. His story is actually very interesting. Very quickly, we'll just say that what happened was he was the foster brother of Uthman ibn Affan. Uthman ibn Affan, i.e. they have the same foster mother. So they're very close. And when Mecca was conquered, he somehow secretly managed to get to Uthman and begged him for forgiveness. So Uthman hid him until things calmed down. Until the Mecca was conquered, everybody's calmed down. After a few days, Uthman brings him directly to the Prophet ﷺ. And he begs for forgiveness and asks to be forgiven and accepts Islam. He's standing in front of the Prophet ﷺ, all of the Sahaba around. The Prophet ﷺ does not do anything. Complete silence. And the silence becomes so thick and dense, but nobody, what can you do? After a long pause, the Prophet ﷺ says, okay, accepted. Then he leaves. The Prophet ﷺ then turns to the Sahaba and said, weren't any of you wise enough to understand why I didn't say yes? Why didn't you execute him? Meaning the command was to execute. That was the previous command, right? The command was to execute. Weren't any of you wise enough to understand? So one of the Ansar said, Ya Rasulullah, why didn't you motion with your eyes? Like this, you know? Why didn't you motion with your eyes? And the Prophet ﷺ said, it is not befitting that a Prophet of Allah give signals with his eyes to kill somebody. It's not, even when I did it, you're all laughing. It's not befitting, right? For a Rasul, for a Nabi to give isharat with his eyes, it is not befitting. But subhanAllah, and that's a beautiful story, by the way. So much benefit from the story, because this man, Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh, when he repented, he truly repented. And eventually he hasuna Islamu, his Islam became very strong. He regretted what he had done. Umar appointed him to be the governor of Egypt, by the way. He was the governor of Egypt, one of the first governors of Egypt. In fact, the first governor of Egypt. After Amr. Amr was the conqueror. And so the first political figure that was sent to rule over Egypt was Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh. And he lived a very righteous life, and he died a beautiful death as well. And subhanAllah, it really shows us that, and we've said this so many times, but our Rasul ﷺ is indeed the best human, but he is not God. He is not Allah. And Allah had a different plan for Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh, you know. So and no doubt he deserved to be executed. And had he been executed, it is deserving. But Allah had something else planned. And so this is one of those who was not executed. Also on the list to be executed were the two women, the slave girls we talked about, right? The ones who had written lots of poetry, and their names were Fartana and Sarah. Fartana and Sarah. These were the two names, and of these two, Fartana was executed. Sarah, eventually she fled, eventually she asked for forgiveness, and she was forgiven, so her life was spared as well. So we talked about Ibn Akhtal and Miqyas. They were killed. Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh was spared. Of the two women, one was spared. Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl was eventually spared as well. Very, very interesting story of Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl. That when Mecca was conquered, he was the one trying to fight. When he lost, he fled. He fled immediately. He didn't wait for the Prophet to enter in. And he fled to Jeddah. He took a ship to Habasha. He went to Abyssinia, that he was going to go into exile. What's he going to do now? Where is he going to go? Arabia is conquered. So he flees to Jeddah. From Jeddah he goes into a ship and he goes to Abyssinia. And on the way to Abyssinia, a beautiful story happens. And that is that the ship, now obviously it's a few days he would have been in Jeddah, then he's now getting on the ship to Abyssinia. And so a storm overtakes the ship. And you can imagine these are going to be their dingy ships back in those days, and very old and whatnot. And the captain of the ship says that we don't have the power to withstand this storm. For sure we're going to drown. looking at the conditions here, for sure we're going to drown. So now is the time to make dua to Allah. For wallahi, you and I both know that our gods are not going to help us at this point in time. Now the captain was a pagan as well, right? So he's telling the people on the ship, you have only one way to be saved, that's a miracle from up there, and you better make dua to him and not to these false gods, because we both know, let's cut all of the crap basically, we both know only one being is going to help us, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of these other idols are not going to help us. Ikrimah says, that was when it struck me. Yani subhanallah, imagine, right? This man as well, Allah had intended something good for him. Even though he's the son of the Fir'aun of this ummah. Even though the number one on the list, kill whatever you see, is Ikrimah. Number one on the list. And wallahi, he deserves to be on the list. But Allah has another plan. So, on the ship, after 20 years of being who he is, then he said the light bulb went off basically. And, well, he didn't say that obviously, but you get the point. And he said that it occurred to me then that if our gods will not help us when we need them, then why should we worship these gods when we don't need them? Right? It's simple common sense here. When we need them most, these gods are not going to help us. So then why at ease and comfort we should go back on land and worship these gods and forget about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So he realized after all that La ilaha illallah is true, which shows us over and over again that these pagans, many of them, Abu Sufyan included, and he heard Ikrimah and others, they genuinely believed that these gods were living beings. These gods could hear and obey and listen to and whatnot and give them what they wanted. And therefore do not be surprised when you meet somebody who still believes in these types of things, or whatever their culture and civilization says. It's not that easy to be persuaded from the religion that you happen to be born into. This is the fact of the matter. And finally Ikrimah says, and this is his own story, he's narrating it, it's a long hadith. Ikrimah says that, oh Allah, I promise you, if you save me, I will accept Islam. And I will go to your Rasul ﷺ and I will find and I will put my hand in his hand, and I will find him to be forgiving and merciful. So Allah saved Ikrimah. And as soon as he went back to Jeddah, he immediately went to the Prophet ﷺ, who was still in Mecca before Hunayn, and he had wrapped himself in a turban, so that because he was, if anybody would see him, he would kill him immediately. He had wrapped a turban around his face, and he made his way, very dangerous, made his way through the camp until he stood in front of the Prophet ﷺ, and he now unfurled himself and he said, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu annaka la rasulullah. Then he gave his whole story. And so when he gave the story, so the Prophet then accepted his Islam, and Ikrimah, he died a shaheed fighting against the Romans later on. So he clearly showed himself to be sincere as a convert. So here's yet another one that was spared. One or two more are mentioned. Three more we'll quickly mention, that we're done for today. Three more we'll mention. So how many have we mentioned so far? No, definitely more than five. Ikrimah, Ibn al-Akhtal, Miqyas, Abdullah ibn Abi Sarah, and the two women. We've mentioned six. Of these six, how many were actually killed so far? Three are so far. Three are killed and three are spared. Okay, we'll mention another three to make it 9. Of these three, 2 are killed and 1 is spared. Okay, so a total of 5 people killed out of more than 2,000. So who are these other 3? Very quickly, number 1 is Al-Huwayrith ibn al-Nuqayth. Al-Huwayrith ibn al-Nuqayth. And number 2 is Habbar ibn al-Aswad. Who can remind me who Habbar ibn al-Aswad is? Who can remind me who Habbar ibn al-Aswad is?
He's a bad guy. I know you said that, but you're going to mention this name, nobody's going to know that.
Is he the one?
He remembers I said the name. I like this. I know you said the name somewhere in the seerah. MashaAllah.
Is he the one who attacked Prophet during the Uhud?
No.
No. He was killed there.
Yeah, he was killed right then and there. Yeah.
6-7 lectures before.
No, this is 2 years or 3 years ago. This is a long time ago. Do you not remember the Habbarid dynasty
Yes.
of India? Yes, the Habbarid dynasty of India, of the first Islamic dynasties ever in Multan, in Sindh, in Pakistan. You Pakistanis, and I should say us Pakistanis, should know this dynasty. The city of Mansoura, which is outside of Multan and Karachi and others, still to this day you find the remnants, right? They are called the Habbarids. This is their ancestor, Habbar, whom the Prophet ﷺ by name said he should not be spared. Obviously he was spared because there's a dynasty called the Habbarid dynasty. Okay, so what did Habbar do? Can you remind me? Now that I told you who it is, or you still don't remember? Still don't remember. So Habbar was the one who refused to allow Zainab, the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ, to emigrate. Remember in the Battle of Badr, Zainab's husband, right? The Prophet ﷺ had made an agreement with him that I will set you free if you send my daughter back. That was the agreement, right? And so he followed up with that promise. But he acted a bit foolishly in that he publicly sent the daughter back. And he should have done it discreetly. So in broad daylight, he sends Zainab with their belongings and everything, and the Quraysh are fuming. How dare we return, the daughter of Muhammad to Muhammad? That's never going to happen. And they surround, and they don't know what to do because it's a woman. Habbar was the one, took his spear and shoved it at the animal, not at her. The animal jostled backwards, she fell off, she was pregnant, she had a miscarriage. She lost the baby. This is Habbar. Okay, so Habbar as well, his name was put on the list. Eventually he too repents and he is forgiven. So he manages to get to the process and he's forgiven. Huwaydith ibn al-Nuqayyid, he did something similar, but to the two younger daughters of the Prophet, and there was no pregnancy, there was no miscarriage. But when the Prophet immigrated, so this is way before the early part of the seerah, when the Prophet immigrated, obviously his daughters did not immigrate at the time. He immigrated with Abu Bakr, obviously. So he had entrusted Abbas to bring the other two daughters that were not married, to bring them and deliver him in Mecca. And so Fatima and Kulthum were being taken by Abbas, and this Qurashi, Huwaydith ibn al-Nuqayyid, he was the one who refused to let them go for a while. He threatened them. The two girls fell off of the horse as well, and so he also caused them harm. But obviously they lived obviously, but the very fact that you would do this to two girls and threaten Abbas and whatnot, so he was also not spared, and he was executed. So it was Ali who then executed, because Ali is married to Fatima, as full perfect justice here. It was Ali who then executed. And the final person on the list, I said two were killed, no, two were spared, sorry, one was killed. Two were spared. Habbar was spared, and then the final man on the list was spared. Huwaydith only was killed. The final man on the list, you all know his story, we've done it in a lot of detail, and that is Wahshi. Wahshi as well was put on the list. That he has killed Hamza, and he should not be spared. And Wahshi knew that he would not be spared. So Wahshi, as soon as Mecca was conquered, he fled to Ta'if. He fled to Ta'if, and he only converted when the people of Ta'if converted, after Hunayn. When the people of Ta'if converted and they sent their delegation, so Wahshi was a member of that delegation. And Wahshi accompanied the delegation to the Prophet. I gave you his story 2 years ago as well, that when he converted at that point in time, so the Prophet forgave him. This was now in Medina now. This is not the conquest of Mecca. This is, a year later, year and a half later. So Wahshi comes and the Prophet tells him, "Oh Wahshi, tell me your story in detail." And Wahshi told him all that he had done. And the Prophet is crying till his beard is now wet. And then he says, "Oh Wahshi, I have forgiven you, but don't show me your face." What a punishment, wallahi, what a punishment. Don't show me your face. Get away from my sight, basically, right? And so Wahshi, as long as the Prophet was alive, astaghfirullah, subhanallah, what a punishment, wallahi. He could not be in the same area as the Prophet. Wherever is the Prophet, he has to run away. La hawla wa quwwata illa billah. And even after, he was guilty of crimes and whatnot, and one of the Sahaba said, "I knew that Allah would not spare the killer of Hamza." He was guilty of drinking and whatnot till the day that he, and we don't say this astaghfirullah to, he was in the end of the day a Sahabi, but the Sahaba are levels. Not all of them were like Abu Bakr and Umar. And Wahshi is definitely not of those as-sabiqun al-awwalun. He converts at the very end, and he has, even if he is forgiven, but still there are, taints in that forgiveness. But still in the end, radiyallahu anhum, all of them ajma'in. This, we're already above our time, but very quickly again, just to summarize again. So the full list of people is 9. That multiple books of seerah give here and there. The full list is 9. Of this full list, only 4 are actually killed, and 5 were in the end spared. So even the exceptions turn out to be exceptions. Even the exceptions by and large are forgiven, other than basically 4 people at max, and the rest of them also are forgiven.